In February 1952, King George VI died in his sleep at Sandringham House. Within hours, the lives of his two daughters split apart forever. One would become the longest reigning monarch in British history. The other would spend much of her life trapped in the shadow of an institution that never fully knew what to do with her once it no longer needed another queen. Elizabeth inherited the crown. Margaret inherited the consequences of standing too close to it. They were raised in the same family, by the same parents, inside the same palaces, and under the same monarchy. But long before either woman had any real say in her future, the system had already decided who mattered more. Elizabeth was necessary. Margaret was ornamental. And for decades, the palace worked very hard to present that arrangement as natural, harmless, even glamorous, while one sister slowly disappeared beneath the weight of it. But beneath both of their stories lies another one, a darker one the royal household avoided for nearly half a century. Two women, alive, officially listed as dead. A hospital in Surrey. Questions nobody wanted asked publicly, and a silence that becomes harder to explain the longer historians examine it. Because at a certain point, the difference between hiding something and refusing to look directly at it begins to disappear. That shadow still hangs over this family now. But to understand how we arrived there, to understand what happened to Elizabeth, to Margaret, and to the people orbiting both of them, you have to begin with the death of their father. Because when George VI died in 1952, the monarchy did not simply create a queen. It created two entirely different destinies. George VI did not want to be king. That fact is so well established, so thoroughly documented in diaries and letters and personal testimonies and first-hand accounts, that repeating it risks making it feel like a cliché. It is not a cliché. It was the defining event of his life, the earthquake from which everything else he did has to be measured, and the defining condition of his daughters' childhoods. The whole story of what happened to both women has to be read against the backdrop of a man who was handed a job he never auditioned for and spent 16 years trying not to break under its weight. His older brother, David, King Edward VIII to the country, Uncle David to the family, abdicated in December 1936. The reasons are familiar enough not to require lengthy rehearsal. He wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American twice divorced and entirely unacceptable to the establishment by the standards of the era. The establishment would not permit it. He chose the woman. The throne fell sideways onto the man standing next to it. Bertie, Prince Albert, as he had been known before the crown changed his name the way it changes everything, was 39 years old. He had a stutter he had spent years fighting into something manageable with the help of Lionel Logue, the unconventional Australian speech therapist whose methods the medical establishment considered eccentric and whose results everyone watching considered extraordinary. He had a constitution that the physicians around him had already begun worrying about, quietly and without putting too much of it in writing. And he had a deep, settled conviction that he was simply not the right man for the job that had just landed on him without consent, without preparation, and without any warning. He wept when he told his mother what had happened. Queen Mary, not a woman associated with public emotional fragility, reportedly wept alongside him. The distress was genuine, and the people around him knew it. He then spent the next 2 weeks putting himself back together, and went on to become, by the verdict of most serious historians, one of the more consequential British monarchs of the modern era. A man who steadied an institution that could easily have collapsed, through the sheer force of duty, applied consistently and without complaint across 16 years, at a cost to his own health that the institution never fully acknowledged. He had 2 daughters when the abdication happened. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, known to the family as Lilibet, was 10 years old in December 1936. Margaret Rose was 6. Both of them, in the space of a single afternoon, became the daughters of a king. And from that single biographical fact, 2 completely different lives unfolded, shaped by forces neither girl had chosen, and neither could fully resist once the machinery started moving. Elizabeth was born on April 21, 1926, at the London home of her maternal grandparents in Bruton Street, and nobody who recorded the birth treated it as a particularly historic event. She was a princess, certainly, the daughter of the second son of the king, but the throne was nowhere near her. David was healthy. David was popular. David was going to marry someone appropriate eventually and produce heirs of his own in the normal course of things. And Lilibet would grow up to be a pleasant, aristocratic duchess, somewhere on the comfortable margins of public life, performing the usual functions of minor royalty. George and Elizabeth, Bertie and his wife, the former Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who would eventually become the woman the country called the Queen Mother, ran an unusually warm and domestic household by royal standards. The family lived at 145 Piccadilly, a townhouse rather than a palace, and later at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, and the atmosphere inside both homes was described by contemporary observers as notably affectionate and consciously ordinary. Children called their parents Mummy and Papa. Mealtimes involved actual conversation. Dogs were permitted in rooms where dogs probably should not have been. Lilibet was the serious one, methodical and already possessed, even as a small child, of a quality observers kept trying to name precisely and kept arriving at something like containment. Margaret was the brilliant one, quick and funny and magnetically charming, a child who walked into a room and immediately occupied it, who could do impressions that made her parents helpless with laughter, and who seemed to have been born with an instinctive, fully operational understanding of how to make people feel that she was exactly the person they most wanted to be talking to. What those same contemporary accounts also record, with a certain careful ambivalence, is how early the gap between them began to open. Not in their parents' affection, which by all accounts was genuinely equal, but in the institutional attention paid to their futures. Her grandfather, George V, still alive and reigning, had a particular regard for his eldest granddaughter that he demonstrated in small, accumulating ways. He called her the pride of the bunch, and this was not idle flattery from a man not known for idle flattery. The old king invited her to public occasions in a way he did not invite Margaret, exposing her to the rhythms and textures of royal duty in doses calibrated to her age. She watched, she listened, she absorbed. She gave very little away. That ability to give very little away, to maintain the performance of composure regardless of what was happening on the inside, would become the central professional skill of a 70-year reign. And she was practicing it at 5 years old. Margaret watched all of this from the position of second daughter, and from very early she understood what the position meant without having anyone sit her down and explain it. It meant she would never be queen. It also meant that her own desires and temperament and ambitions were of secondary institutional importance because the requirements of the succession had already been assigned to the bedroom next door. This is not a small thing to learn. Most people spend a significant portion of their adult lives coming to terms with the discovery that they are not the center of some other person's world. Margaret was required to absorb that discovery about a dynasty and a nation before she finished primary school. The abdication changed everything and changed nothing. She was no longer a secondary princess with a comfortable private future available. She was the heir presumptive to the British throne, and the structure of her education and preparation adjusted immediately and completely. Constitutional history entered her curriculum. Her father began including her in conversations he had previously kept for adults. Access to the machinery of government, how Parliament actually related to the Crown in practice, what the sovereign's role genuinely consisted of, accelerated in a way that had no parallel in her sister's upbringing. It changed nothing because Margaret's position relative to Elizabeth remained exactly what it had always been. Second, subordinate. Required to want less, expect less, and defer to the requirements of a succession she was not part of. The decision to keep Elizabeth and Margaret in England during the Blitz, the Queen Mother's decision, expressed in a sentence so clean it became immediately quotable. The girls spent the war years primarily at Windsor Castle, close enough to the conflict to understand its scale and protected enough from its worst effects to emerge from it intact. At 13, Lilibet gave her first public broadcast, speaking on BBC Radio to the evacuated children of Britain in an address that was scripted and careful, and even through the crackle of a 1940 recording. Surprisingly assured, at 16, she registered for war service. At 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, trained as a driver and mechanic, and was photographed working under vehicles in uniform, looking entirely comfortable with the grease on her hands. The photographs communicated, without requiring anyone to say so directly, that the institution's future head understood that the monarchy's survival depended on being seen to share the country's conditions. Margaret, too young for any comparable role, watched her sister begin to become the person history had assigned her. And inside the genuine warmth of the family and the real closeness between the two sisters, which is not in dispute, which was documented and attested by everyone who knew them, Margaret was also. From somewhere in her mid-teens onward, watching the distance between their futures widen into something that no amount of affection between siblings was going to close. The man who changed Margaret's life was a decorated fighter pilot who had been appointed to the royal household as an equerry, a personal aide to George VI. Group Captain Peter Townsend had survived the Battle of Britain and been awarded the Distinguished Service Order. He was 15 years older than Margaret. He had been divorced, and he was present, constantly, in the same rooms and at the same dinners and on the same family trips as the Windsors, for years. Margaret was 15 when he joined the household. The feelings developed slowly and then all at once, in the way these things do, and by the time both of them understood what was happening, the people around them had understood it for some time already. George VI knew. The king had watched it accumulate and had done nothing decisive about it in either direction, which in retrospect reads as either the paralysis of a man with too many other things crushing him, or the deliberate choice of a father who could not bring himself to close a door. He knew his daughter had opened her whole heart toward. He died in February 1952 without having resolved it. He was 56 years old. A lung operation the previous year had removed tissue. The doctors had carefully avoided calling cancerous in official communications. The cigarettes, there were always cigarettes, in every private photograph, in every account of his private hours, had done their work. He died in his sleep at Sandringham on the morning of February 6. Margaret was at Sandringham. She found out before her sister did. There is a particular quality to grief that arrives alongside a coronation, and it is not the grief most people experience, because it comes packaged with an institutional demand that you set it aside immediately and go to work. Elizabeth had roughly 48 hours to be a daughter before the machinery of state required her to function as a monarch. Margaret had no such machinery. She was the sister of the new queen, and she grieved without structure, and the man she loved was still in the household. And the question of what would happen next had not been decided and was not going to be decided gently. The crisis broke into public view at the coronation in June 1953. A photographer at Westminster Abbey caught Margaret reaching toward Townsend to brush a piece of lint from the medals on his uniform chest. The gesture lasted seconds. It was tender and entirely unguarded and legible to anyone present with eyes, and within days, the British press had the story. The American and European press had been reporting on the relationship for months already. Because the royal family's talent for keeping secrets from domestic correspondence has never reliably extended to foreign journalists who have no stake in maintaining the dignity of the British crown. What followed was a constitutional catastrophe conducted throughout in the vocabulary of measured procedure and institutional propriety, which made it worse rather than better. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772 required members of the royal family under 25 to obtain the sovereign's consent to marry. Margaret was 22. Elizabeth was now the sovereign. Elizabeth's consent was insufficient without parliamentary approval, and Parliament in 1953, under Churchill's Conservative government, was not prepared to sanction a marriage between a princess and a divorced man, the Church of England was equally clear and equally immovable. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, conveyed his position through the appropriate channels in language that was diplomatic in form and categorical in content. The institution closed around Margaret with the quiet efficiency of something that has been doing exactly this for several centuries. Townsend was posted to Brussels as an heir attaché. Margaret was told, through the gentle, persistent pressure of institutional suggestion, that she might wish to wait until she turned 25, at which point parliamentary approval would no longer be required. She waited 2 years. 2 years of letters to Brussels and official duties performed, and nothing said publicly, and everything felt privately. When she turned 25 in August 1955, the technical rules changed. Parliamentary approval was no longer mandated. The Church had not changed its position. The expectation, communicated through every available channel in the quiet but unmistakable way the institution communicated things it did not want to have to say directly, was that marriage to Townsend would require Margaret to renounce her succession rights, her royal income, and her official duties. She would remain a princess by blood. She would cease to function as one. In October 1955, Margaret issued a statement from Clarence House. She had written it herself. It was short, formally worded, and composed with a precision that made the emotion inside it invisible, which was, she had learned from watching the woman she was about to put first, exactly how a royal woman in her family communicated the most important things. She said she had decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. She said she had reached this decision mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of her duty to the Commonwealth. She did not say what she was giving up. She did not say what it cost her. She never said those things, not publicly, not in any interview, not in any document released during her lifetime. The country received this with a flood of public sympathy and a wave of institutional relief. She was 25 years old, and she had just made the largest decision of her life in the direction she did not want to go, in service of an institution that would spend the next 47 years uncertain what to do with her. She married in May 1960. Anthony Armstrong Jones was a photographer from the kind of background, talented, socially connected, artistically ambitious, that the palace found simultaneously attractive because it suggested Margaret was drawing the monarchy toward modernity, and faintly alarming for precisely the same reason. He was a commoner. He moved through a London world of artists and theater people and writers and designers. He was witty and unconventional, and entirely unlike the candidates that royal watchers had expected Margaret to choose. He was created Earl of Snowdon on their wedding day. The marriage was, for a period, genuinely happy, and this needs to be said plainly, because the story of how it ended has a tendency to consume everything that came before it. They had 2 children, David and Sarah. Tony brought into Margaret's life a creative world she had always been drawn toward and had never quite been permitted full access to. And within that world, she functioned with a freedom and an ease that observers found striking. She was funny and sharp and a serious reader and a serious listener, and people who knew her in this period liked her, genuinely liked her. The way you like someone who is good company rather than the performed appreciation you offer a princess whose table you have been placed at. The marriage frayed, as marriages do, and the fraying was not clean or private. Tony was unfaithful, repeatedly, and without significant concealment. Margaret was, in the accounts of people who knew them both, difficult to live with in ways that had more to do with the structural unhappiness of her situation than with any fundamental defect of character, though the tabloids were not interested in that distinction, and the 1970s press was not known for its nuanced treatment of unhappy royal women. The name Roddy Llewellyn appeared in the newspapers in 1976. He was 17 years younger than Margaret, a landscape gardener from an aristocratic but modest background, and the photographs of them together on the island of Mustique were used to build a story the press had already decided it wanted to tell. The story was of a woman destroying herself, it is not a completely unfair story. It is also not a complete one. The marriage to Snowdon ended in 1978. First divorce in the immediate royal family since the abdication. She was 47 years old. She had no serious institutional role. She had no purpose the palace treated as genuine. She had 2 children and a life filled with official engagements and social obligations and people whose company she enjoyed, and a structural loneliness underneath all of it. That was not the kind of loneliness you fix by surrounding yourself with more people. In 1985, surgeons removed part of her left lung. The cigarettes had been 60 a day at the peak, across decades, and the lung had recorded every one of them faithfully. The strokes began in 1998, a mild one in Mystique, another in 1999, another in 2001. Each took something that did not return. The left hand required a permanent glove because the damaged nerves had left the skin too vulnerable to heat from ordinary objects. The wheelchair, the difficulty eating, the difficulty speaking. The long, quiet removal from the world by damage accumulated across years, with a consistency that people who watched it unfold described as something closer to self-erasure than accident. She died on February 9, 2002, at King Edward VII Hospital in London. She was 71 years old. Her sister, who had received the crown, was still alive. Her mother, who had held the family in its shape around the crown, was still alive. The Queen Mother would survive her by 7 weeks, dying on March 30 at 101. Margaret went first. She left last, among the generations above her, in the accounting that families do silently in these moments. And she left, having given the thing the institution asked for, and received in return a life that the institution never quite figured out what to do with. Now we arrive at the part of this story that does not have a clean explanation attached to it, and was not going to be given one by the people who could have provided it. Nerissa Bowes-Lyon and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were not George VI's daughters in the direct sense. They were his nieces, daughters of his brother John Herbert Bowes-Lyon, which made them first cousins of Elizabeth II and first cousins once removed of Princess Margaret. Both women had severe intellectual disabilities from birth. Both were admitted to Earlswood Hospital in Surrey. Nerissa in 1941, at the age of 22. Catherine shortly afterward, at 15. In 1963, Burke's Peerage, the official genealogical register of the British aristocracy, the reference that everyone with a stake in bloodlines consulted, sent its standard update forms to the family. The family filled them in and returned them. Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were listed on the forms as deceased. They were not deceased. They were alive in Surrey, in Earlswood Hospital, where they had lived for 22 years and would continue to live for years more. Nerissa died in 1986, actually died, this time, and was buried under a plastic name tag and a number. Not a name. A hospital serial number. The kind of marker used when a patient has nobody coming to claim them, nobody to insist on something more. A proper grave marker was eventually placed. The plastic tag and the number are what she had first. Catherine lived until 2014. The Sun ran the story in 1987, 46 years after the institutionalization, 24 years after the Burke's Peerage listing, 1 year after Nerissa's death. And the palace's response was to neither confirm nor deny nor explain, which by that point was its standard response to anything sufficiently inconvenient. The official version, advanced by the authorized biographer William Shawcross and others who had been granted access to the royal archives, held that the Burke's Peerage listing was a clerical error. A family member, filling out the forms carelessly, had ticked the wrong boxes, listed living daughters as dead because it was easier, in the moment, than explaining the situation to a genealogical publisher. The Queen Mother, in this version of events, did not know her nieces were alive until 1982, when the information came to her through other channels. Once she found out, she was appropriately horrified and made private charitable donations to MenCap, the organization supporting people with learning disabilities. The revisionist version requires only that you pay attention to the year in which the institutionalization occurred, 1941, 5 years after the abdication. At the precise moment, the royal family was engaged in the most intensive project of credibility. Rebuilding it had undertaken in decades, through wartime sacrifice and visible solidarity with the British public. At a moment in which the eugenic thinking that was entirely mainstream in the 1940s, thinking from which the royal family was no more immune than anyone else of their class and generation, treated hereditary disability as a statement about bloodlines and dynasties. Two cousins of the Queen with severe intellectual disabilities, discovered by the press in that climate in that year, would have become a story about hereditary weakness in the Windsor bloodline at exactly the moment the family could least afford any such story. They were institutionalized. The paperwork was managed. The Burke's peerage forms were filled in with the answers that made the question disappear. And then 46 years passed, during which nobody in the family in a position of authority publicly said the names of these two women, and the institutional silence was maintained across decades, and prime ministers and coronations and jubilees maintained until a tabloid newspaper located it and printed it, and the palace found itself without a satisfactory response. The Queen Mother was the matriarch of the Bowes-Lyon family. She had been at its center since the 1920s. She was the keeper of its memory, the architect of its public face, the woman who managed what the family presented to the world and what it declined to present. The proposition that she spent 46 years unaware of the existence of two of its members whose institutionalization had involved family paperwork, whose condition was known to cousins and aunts and various living relations, whose existence had been recorded and then unrecorded in the official genealogy, requires a degree of selective incuriosity that does not match anything else known about how she operated. The more probable truth is the one that powerful institutions tend to produce when something inconvenient needs to continue existing somewhere. It was not acknowledged, because acknowledging it would have cost something. The cost was the appearance of a dynasty with no hereditary complications. The benefit accrued to the institution. The price was paid by two women who lived and died in a Surrey hospital, while their cousin appeared on the stamps, and the family said their names in the past tense in a reference book. That is not the worst thing the monarchy has ever done. History provides no shortage of worse things, but it is a choice, not an accident. A sustained, deliberate, decades-long institutional choice. And the people who made it, and the people who maintained it across 46 years of silence, knew what they were doing. They were simply very practiced at not saying so out loud. Return, finally, to Elizabeth. She reigned for 70 years. 70 years is a number that resists immediate comprehension, so a comparison helps to locate it properly. When Elizabeth II became queen in February 1952, Winston Churchill was serving his second stint as prime minister. Harry Truman was in the White House. Stalin was alive in Moscow. The Korean War was still being fought. Commercial television had not yet come to Britain. By the time she died in September 2022, 14 British prime ministers had served under her. 15 American presidents had held office during her reign. The Soviet Union had ceased to exist for 31 years. She had met every significant world leader of the modern era, corresponded with all of them, and outlasted nearly every institution, ideology, consensus, and certainty that had seemed permanent at the beginning. She accomplished this by doing one specific thing, very deliberately, for a very long time, containing herself, keeping whatever she thought and felt and privately believed inside the envelope of the role, and never allowing the person to leak past the institution in any legible way. This is presented in most accounts as a form of discipline, a professional virtue. It was also, in a real sense, a form of self-erasure. The person who was erased was not an adversary. It was her. The diary she kept as a young woman was never published. Her views on the political events of 7 decades were shared with her prime ministers in weekly audiences conducted in private and nowhere else. The moments when she disagreed with government policy, and she disagreed with significant things across 70 years, are visible only at the very edges of the official record. In the precise selection of a particular word, in the slight deviation from the expected script that could be read as signal by someone paying close enough attention. Her relationship with her sister lived inside all of this, constant and unspoken. They spoke by telephone every morning for decades, 20 minutes, roughly. Sisters talking in the way sisters who have known each other since before either of them formed proper memories talk, without much preamble, without much ceremony, with the ease of people who have shared the same formative architecture. What Elizabeth could have done differently in 1955, with the tools she had as a young and new monarch, surrounded by men of her father's generation who had spent their careers managing what was and was not possible for royals. That question, the historical record cannot answer cleanly. Whether she was outmaneuvered by a system heavier than either of them, or whether she had options she did not pursue, is something biographers have reached opposite conclusions about, and will probably continue debating for as long as the subject is worth discussing. What is not in dispute is the outcome for Margaret. What is not in dispute is the outcome for Nerissa and Catherine. What is not in dispute is that the institution which produced these outcomes was the same institution to which Elizabeth gave 70 years of herself, with a discipline and completeness that has no real precedent in the modern history of the monarchy. She was, by any serious measure, extraordinary at the job. She was also part of the system that did what the system did. Both of those things are true simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive. They rarely are when the subject is an institution rather than a symbol, a life rather than a legend. George VI died at 56, worn out by a job he had not wanted, and a war that had taken everything out of him, and a set of lungs that registered the cost of it all in terms the physicians spent years trying to manage. He left behind 2 daughters. One of them carried the crown for 70 years. By the verdict of Republican critics and monarchist defenders alike, she became the single most effective argument for the institution's continued survival that the institution has ever produced. The other gave up the man she loved at 25 in service of an institution that rewarded her sacrifice with decades of ornamental uncertainty. She was brilliant and funny and lonely, in the structural way that people are lonely when they have nowhere to put their energy, that the world agrees matters. She drank and smoked and was good company, and died at 71 while her sister and her mother were still alive. And in the corner of the family's official record, listed as deceased since 1963, 2 women lived in a Surrey hospital until they died, one with a plastic name tag in the ground. One in 2014, 73 years after the admission, having outlived by more than a decade the listing that said she was already dead. 2 daughters then, one tragic and one triumphant, and both of them shaped entirely by forces that had been set in motion before either of them was born, by an institution that required everything and explained nothing, and kept going long after the people it had used up were gone. The palace, the crown, the cost, not one daughter's tragedy and the other's triumph. Both held together, because the history that tries to separate them is not being honest about what the institution required and what it took and who, in the end, paid for it.